Hello, hello, hello. Long time no see. So today we are studying Ingrej O Bharatbashi by, of course, Rabindranath Tagore. But it's very shameful that I can't read Bengali properly. I can read it, but if I have to read it for academic purpose and then write about it, it gets really, really difficult. And I hope many of you are with me in this struggle. So what I have today is I have the English translation of it. Yeah, you heard that right. I have an English translation, and we are going to do it in, excuse me, 4 parts. Okay. So I guess we should begin now. Let me just quickly set up my timer. Okay, let's go. So this essay starts with a quote from Matthew Arnold, okay, the Englishman and the Indian, I'm sorry. So there is nothing like love and admiration for bringing people into likeness with what they love and admire. But the Englishman seems never to dream of employing these influences upon a race he wants to fuse with himself. He employs simply material interest for his work of fusion, and beyond these, nothing except scorn and rebuke. Accordingly, there is no vital union between him and the races he has annexed. And while France can freely boast of her magnificent unity, a unity of spirit no less than of name between all the people who compose her, in our country, the Englishman proper is a union of spirit with no one except other Englishmen proper like himself. You'll get it, you don't need to understand this point. So let's begin. In our ancient Puranas and histories, we read that unless there is some flaw or crack in a person's character or conduct, misfortune, that is Alakshmi, finds no entry. But unfortunately, almost every nation has at least one such flaw. And what is even more unfortunate is that where a person's weakness lies, there also lies his greatest affection. So Tagore is saying that in our Sanatan Dharma, in our Puranas and history, we get to know that unless there is some flaw, some fault, some folly, some drawback in a person's character, Alakshmi cannot enter, misfortune. But unfortunately, every country of this world, every nation of this world has some or the other such a flaw. Okay, and what is even more unfortunate is where the weakness lies of a person of a nation, there also lies their greatest affection. Tagore can't be compared with anybody. His greatest affection. The Englishman too seems to cherish the arrogance in his own character with a kind of special pride. For example, an Englishman, his fault is his pride, but he cherishes that the most. That is his most special part, right? The ordinary Englishman inwardly regards as something praiseworthy this unshakable narrowness of outlook that he maintains, and the complete lack of effort he makes to mix or associate with those among whom he comes, whether through travel or through ruling over them. His attitude is this: just as a husking pestle remains a husking pestle even in heaven, so the Englishman remains an Englishman everywhere, upright and unchanged, no matter what. There is simply no way he can become otherwise. Tagore is saying that we are taking an example of the Englishman. This Englishman's weakness is he is very narrow-minded, he is very boastful, he is very prideful, but he cherishes exactly those. His way of looking at people, him not mixing with the people he's daily talking to, he's daily traveling with, he's daily ruling on. He can't mix with them, he can't associate with them. So even though these are his faults, these are what makes him happy. Yeah, this is who I am, That is so true in our daily lives as well, in today's lives as well. We hear this quote often: that is who I am. Don't come to change me. I know it's a fault of mine, but I know that this fault has become my USP, my greatest affection. Hence, Dheki Shaulgyo Dhan. Okay, that is a person who is so used to pestling the rice grains on earth will go to heaven and do exactly that. There is no other way for them. I hope I can make you understand. This lack of charm, this complete indifference to becoming intimate with one's followers and dependents and understanding their hearts, this habit of judging the entire world according to one's own customs and standards, this flaw in the Englishman's character is one open gateway for misfortune or Alakshmi to enter. What is the fault of the Englishman? The lack of charm, narrow-mindedness. I don't want to understand, I don't want to mix with the people who follow me, who are under me, over whom I am ruling. This complete indifferent attitude to understanding their hearts, the habit of judging the entire world, according to their own customs. Englishman custom, Englishman habit, Englishman standard, right? This flaw in the Englishman's character is one open gateway for misfortune to enter. Wherever there is the slightest possibility of an enemy approaching, the Englishman carefully seals the entrance. He stations guard at every path and approach and crushes even the tiniest sprout of danger underfoot. That is his heart from being wide open, from others coming inside his heart, his followers, their hearts, their understanding. He will stop it. Even the tiniest sprout of understanding, right? Where is it? Even the tiniest sprout of danger underfoot, he will stop it. He's not going to widen his horizon. Yet, the one moral obstacle that exists within his own nature is he daily indulges and nurtures it, sometimes with a little regretful side, but out of fond attachment, he can never bring himself to lay a hand on his fault, that is. So there is one moral obstacle in his heart that sometimes stops him from narrowing his horizon even more, that is, strengthening his fault, is he daily indulges and nurtures it, sometimes with a little regretful side that, oh, I'm mixing with these people, they seem to be good, but I will not take them as good because that is who I am. But out of fond attachment, he can never bring himself to lay a hand on it. I'll still want to teach you all this particular paragraph in a little bit more way. What does this line of the essay exactly mean? Write in very simple language as if talking to a 5-year-old child, explaining it thoroughly. Okay, so there is a man, the Englishman, okay, who is very, very careful about bad guys coming to hurt him. If even a teeny tiny bad guy, like a little enemy, tries to come close from far away, he locks every single door tightly. He puts big guards everywhere, at every road, every gate, every small path. If he sees even the smallest baby plant of danger starting to grow, he steps on it hard and smashes it so it dies right away. He is super strict and strong about all dangers that come from outside. But there is one bad thing that lives inside him, inside his own heart and inside his own character. It's like a naughty habit or mean thought that makes him act proud, rude, or unkind to other people, especially people who are not English. Every single day, he sees this bad thing inside himself, and instead of fighting it or throwing it away, he actually feeds it and lets it grow bigger. He gives it love and keeps it safe like a favorite pet. And sometimes he feels a teeny bit sorry and says, oops, maybe I shouldn't be like this. But then he hunts it again and says, no, I can't hurt my favorite bad habit. So he is very brave and strict about tiny dangers outside, but he is very soft and weak about the big bad thing that lives inside his own heart. That's what the line is saying. He stops every little danger from coming in from outside, but he happily lets the biggest danger, his own bad character is called, stay inside and grow stronger every day. He protects his house from enemies outside, but he never protects his own heart from the enemy that already lives inside it. I think it can't get clearer than this. I am sure. Okay, so whenever there is the slightest possibility of an enemy approaching the Englishman, carefully blah, 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 blah. Yet, the one moral obstacle, his fault, that exists within his own nature, he daily feeds it and nurtures it. Okay, that one danger he can't overcome because that one danger makes his USP. That is who I am. That is who he is. He is. It is exactly like a man who walks stomping through someone else's. I think we'll first go over to the baby languages and then we'll come and read the original one. Do similar thing. Explain it to me like to a 5-year-old child, so that after reading this version, I can go back to the original version and get it clearly. But I'm a 5-year-old child. Keep it very clear and very interesting, by the way. Keep the essence of Tagore, but to a 5-year-old child. So you know what will happen? We'll understand it so nicely that it becomes easier for you and me to write an exam. Okay, I'm going to tell you the story exactly like we are 5 years old. Super simple and fun, but still keeping Tagore's big feelings inside it. After you get this baby version, you can go back to the grown-up version and say, oh, now I get it. Okay, so we do that. So imagine a big, strong farmer wearing super heavy, clumpy boots. He walks into somebody else's beautiful atar bagan field, and the wheat is all golden and ready to eat, like yummy chapati waiting to grow. He is so worried about one tiny little bird coming and stealing just one single grain. No, not even one grain for you, naughty bird. He shouts. So he stomps around very loud, boom, 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 waving his arms to scare the birds away. And yes, the birds get scared and fly off. Good job, right? But while he's busy shouting and stomping to save that one tiny grain, his big heavy boots are smashing hundreds and hundreds of beautiful wheat plants. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Whole rows of wheat get flattened and broken. The whole field gets hurt a lot. But the farmer does not even notice. He is only thinking about the bird. He does not look down at the poor crushed plants under his own boots. Now listen to what Tagore is really saying with this picture. We, the people of India, are like that wheat field. Peaceful, growing, minding our own business. We don't have any big enemies jumping over the fence to attack us, right? No lions, no robbers, no scary danger running towards us. But suddenly, thud, a very heavy boot lands right on our chest. Ouch! It hurts so much. That boot belongs to the Englishman. He did not mean to hurt us on purpose, but he is wearing those thick, hard boots all the time, everywhere he goes. He refuses to take them off, not even for a second, because I am English and the English people always wear these boots. So even when he's just walking normally through our field, our country, his boots keep hurting us without him noticing it. And guess what? His own feet get tired and sore inside those heavy boots too. Have you worn those heavy boots? He also suffers a little, but he still won't take them off. Now, the grown-up part at the end, because the boots keep hurting, people get more and more upset. Why are you stepping on us? First, they feel ouch. Then they start throwing small stones like brickbats back at the bootman to say, stop walking on us, stop hurting us. And the bootman throws stones back too. Nobody wants to stop throwing. Nobody wants to say sorry or take the boots off. So the stone throwing gets bigger and bigger, louder and louder. Tagore is asking sadly, why are we all throwing so many stones at each other these days? Why can't the bootman just take his boots off and walk softly? Why can't we talk nicely instead of hurting each other more? So the story is about a man so busy protecting one tiny thing, like the Englishman's pride of being English, that he does not see that he's hurting a whole big field, lots of people with his own heavy boots, and everyone ends up angry and throwing things because nobody wants to fix the real problem. That is a beautiful thing to study. Now we go to the proper translation. So it is exactly like a man who walks stomping through someone else's right grain field wearing heavy boots, frantic lest a single bird should peck even at one grain. The birds do fly away, true. But he remains completely unaware of how much of the crop is being crushed and ruined beneath those hard boot soles. We have no enemy raiding us, no fear, no danger. Yet that boot comes crashing down upon our chest. We feel the pain, and it is not as if the boot wearer himself suffers no loss, but the Englishman remains an Englishman everywhere. Nowhere is he willing to take off that pair of boots. There is no need for us to discuss all the quarrels and frictions. There is no need for us to discuss all the quarrels and frictions that have arisen between the Englishman and Ireland. Even here in subject India, we can see that growing mutual incompatibility is developing between the Englishman and the English-educated Indians. Given the slightest opportunity, neither side is willing to let the other go. Instead of a slap, the brickbats keep flying. Instead of just one slap and head dropping, the stones keep flying. Like it happened in Ireland. Sorry, Ireland and England, of course. It's happening in England versus the English-educated Indians. Like, why are you crushing us, okay? The brickbats keep flying. The point is, why these days has this tendency to hurl brickbats become so overwhelmingly strong? Why is nobody talking it out? Why is the Englishman not opening his boots and walking softly? Why are the English-educated Indians not communicating the problem properly? But yes, they have said ouch, ouch, but the Englishman didn't remove his boots. It's the problem of the Englishman. Now we go to the next part. I love to study this. Also, from now on, I have decided that I will be attaching the PDF which I study from. Okay, I mean the main material, the English translation for you all for free on my channel in the description. Yeah. Do the same with this 5-year-old child. Explain thoroughly, teach it properly in the essence of the Tagore itself. Imagine a beautiful big garden path that belongs to the British Empire, okay? Like a huge playground made by the English uncle. But this big playground is theirs. Every single day, tiny prickly thorn bushes keep popping up all along this path. Little sharp ones, bigger scratchy ones, pop, 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 they grow overnight. Okay? The English uncle who takes care of this path gets very angry. Even when he sees one tiny thorn, he says, danger, bad thorn. So what does he do? He grabs his big stick and back he beats the newspaper man, even the poor printer man, and throws them in jail if they write something he does not like. He thinks, there, I killed that thorn. Just a second. I'll just go and close the door. A lot of sounds are coming in. No, I think you are doing a mistake. A big garden path from there to beating the newspaper man and even the poor printer man. I did not get this relation. Do it properly, please. Just a second, guys. Here I am. Okay, imagine a very long, we'll do this part like politics, okay? A very long, beautiful path that goes through the whole British Empire, like a giant playground made by the English uncle who's in charge, okay? Every single morning, tiny little thorn bushes start popping up right on this path. Quickly, scratchy ones that can hurt people's feet. Pop one here, pop one there, every day, more and more. The English uncle walks on this path every day. When he sees even one tiny thorn trying to grow, he gets very worried. Oh no, a bad thing! It might hurt someone or hurt me. So what does he do? He takes his big stick and whack, he hits the top of the thorn bush very hard. He cuts off the newspaper man who wrote something he did not like, maybe about the thorny bush. He even grabs the poor printer man, the one who just printed the paper, and puts both of them in jail. There, I stopped the thorn. So can you understand? This thorn is not actually about the thorn, it's about the people he really does not like. Okay. He grows, trying to grow, he gets very worried. Oh no, bad thing, no. He did not like. He even grabs the poor printer man who just printed the paper and puts both of them in jail. There, I stopped the thorn, he says proudly. But the very next day, more thorns pop up somewhere else on the path, and the day after, even more. He keeps whacking the tops of the thorns again and again, but the thorns never stop growing. Tagore says very softly, those thorns are not growing from the ground. They are growing from deep inside people's hearts, from hurt feelings, from feelings ignored, from feeling not loved. To really stop the thorns forever, you have to go inside the heart, like opening a secret door very gently, looking inside with kind eyes and carefully pulling the root out with love. But the English uncle, he can walk everywhere on the path. Smooth roads, bumpy roads, big roads, small roads, no problem. He goes anywhere he wants, except inside people's hearts. Why? Because to go inside a heart, you have to bend your head down a tiny bit. You have to be humble. You have to say, I want to understand you. But his back is very stiff and very proud, like a tall iron pole that never ever bends. He says, me, bend, never. So he stays far, far away from hearts. He tells himself a story to feel better. All this shouting in newspaper, all these angry meetings, all these mean words about the king, that is not real anger from people's hearts. That's just a few naughty, clever boys playing tricks like pulling puppet strings. Inside, everything is perfectly fine. Someone just painted a few ugly marks on the outside to fool us. No need to go look inside hearts. Just catch those naughty boys and punish them. Done. Tagore says that's the big, sad mistake. You can't fix people's hearts by staying far away and never touching them. It's like... Sorry. It's like trying to be friends with someone while standing on the other side of a huge river. You wave, but you never really hug, never really know them. The farther you stay, the more everything fails. People are not toys or machines you can fix by just looking from outside. Even poor, hurt India has a real heart. Warm, feeling, alive, but it's hidden deep inside. Not waving a flag saying, here I am. Even for hard rocks and dirt, scientists have to dig deep and understand the secret parts before they can really control them, right? We have to understand what rocks are made of. You have to dig deep. If you want to be a true friend or teacher or leader for a long, long time, you must have this special superpower. You have to be able to come very, very close to people's hearts, feel what hurts them, love them like your own family. The English uncle has lots of big power, money power, rule power, army power, but he does not have this heart power. He's okay giving help sometimes, like throwing a candy, but he hates coming close. He wants to give the help fast. Here, take it. Then run away quick to his safe place. Then he goes to his fancy book club, eats his green peas, plays his fun game, secretly calls the people he helped bad names, and pushes them far, far away from his own heart. He does not give cuddles. He just gives help. He does not give love. He just gives protection. He does not give real, you are wonderful respect. He just tries to be fair. He never bends down to water the plants himself with his own gentle hands, but he throws big piles of seeds from far away. Then, when no thank you flowers grow, when no happy fruits come, he gets upset and says, bad ground, bad plants. Tagore asks very quietly, like a whisper, hey, isn't it a rule everywhere in the world that if you don't work with your heart, no real thankful fruit ever grows in the heart? So that's why more and more people are picking up stones and throwing them to bring back the anger, because the uncle keeps staying far away, never coming close, never looking inside hearts, and the little hurt feelings keep growing into bigger and bigger thorn bushes every day. The point is this: why these days has this tendency to herd big bags become so overwhelmingly strong? The ruling authorities can declare a particular article in a newspaper to be false and throw not only the editor but even the unfortunate printer into jail. Yet, what real remedy is ever applied to all those little thorny plants that keep sprouting every day along the path of the British Empire? What about them? We have all talked about it in details. I no longer explain it. I no longer teach it. I already taught it. What do they need? They need love, they need care, they need touch, a little bit of bending down of head. When the roots of these thorny plants lie within the mind, the only way to uproot them is enter that mind. But the British Raj has free movement everywhere, along paved roads and dirt tracks, except unfortunately inside that mind. Perhaps to enter that place, one has to bend one's head a little, but the Englishman's spine refuses to bend anywhere. So the Englishman tries to convince himself that all this bitter language in the newspapers, these meetings, these unpleasant criticisms of the monarchy, none of it has anything to do with dissent. It's actually dissent. It is merely the trickery of a handful of educated puppeteers. He says that inside everything is perfectly fine. Whatever slight signs of distortion appear on the surface have simply been painted by clever people. So there is no need to go inside and actually look. It is enough merely to punish the clever person one suspects. It is just an outside activity, okay? There is no sign of dissent. That is precisely the Englishman's fault. He refuses at all costs to come indoors. But one cannot deal with human beings from a distance, avoiding all touch and contact somehow. The greater distance one keeps, the greater the futility one ends up with. Absolutely. You have to come close. Human beings are not lifeless machines that can be understood from the outside. Even fallen India has a heart, and that heart is not hanging from its shirt sleeve for anyone to see. Even inert matter, inactive matter has to be understood. Inactive, right? Inert is inactive. Yes. Yes, inactive. Does not have the ability to move. Even inert matter has to be understood in its hidden depths with the help of science before one can gain complete mastery over material nature. Those who wish to maintain lasting influence over human society must, among many other qualities, possess this special ability to know people intimately. The power to draw very close to human beings is a rare power today. The Englishman has plenty of power, but he lacks this one. He is not unwilling. He is not unwilling to do good turns, but he absolutely refuses to come close. If he can somehow finish rendering the service and then quickly withdraw, he feels relieved. Afterwards, he goes to his club, eats peas, plays billiards, applies contemptuous adjectives, hateful words to those he has benefited, and does his utmost to keep their alien existence as far as possible from his body and mind. These people do not show pity. They confer benefits. They don't show you pity. They just give you benefits. They do not feel affection for you. They offer protection. They do not show you respect, yet they make any effort to act justly. They do not water with their own hands, yet they are never stingy in scattering heaps and heaps of seed. Spreading seed, giving benefits, protection as well. But they will not reap it with their own hands. But when afterwards no sufficient crop of gratitude grows, will you blame only the soil? Is it not a universal law? If no one does not work with the heart, no fruit ripens in the heart. Like if I don't love you enough, how can I expect that you will love me back? Same with this, teach as if you're talking to a 5-year-old child, a simple speech language, essence of the word, every point's covered, okay? Okay. Imagine a big family in our country. The smart, school-going grown-ups who can read and write. These aunties, there are aunties and uncles also, right, are feeling very upset inside their hearts. They keep saying over and over, the English uncle gives us something, like schools, trains, laws, but they don't feel like real love gifts. They feel cold, like medicine, with no sugar, no sweetness, no hug inside. So even though they take the gifts, their hearts stay empty and sad. They don't feel happy or thank you inside. Instead, they feel heavy, like carrying a big bag of stones called, I have to say thank you, but I don't want to because the gifts you're giving me, yes, they are for my benefits, but they are not made with love. Okay, you don't really want to give it to us. You're giving it to us because you're supposed to give us, like a duty. So they try very hard to prove these gifts aren't really good for us. They are not true help. That's why these days in newspapers and letters and talking with friends everywhere, they keep finding clever ways to say bad things about the English uncle. They argue, they complain, they point out mistakes, like see he did this wrong, see he doesn't really care. Tagore says in one short, sad sentence, the English uncle has made himself very important to us. Like we need him for many things, but he never tries to make us love him. He gives medicines, but he forgets to add even a tiny bit of honey or jaggery. So when our tummies feel sick from the plain bitter medicine, instead of saying, sorry, let me make it sweet next time, he gets angry, his eyes turn red like fire, and he roars loud, how dare you complain? Most of the shouting and protests we see today come from this deep, quiet hurt inside people's minds. Like when your tummy is irritated for a long time and you suddenly feel cranky. Now, every single word between us and the English uncle becomes a big fight. Who wins? Who loses? Nobody wants to lose even a tiny point. Sometimes, 5 soft, kind words could fix everything and make things better. But instead, we shout, we get angry, fiery words that burn like sparks, and sometimes the English uncle could easily say, okay, to just one small request with no big harm. But he turns his face away stubbornly each time like, no, never. Tagore says, look, we have two very different families living side by side. The Anglo-Indian people, the English people who live here, and our own Indian family. They want different things in many places, like two children fighting over the same toy. The big king, the government, is like the parent who has to drive the car. He cannot ignore either child. If it does, the car stops moving and nobody goes anywhere. When we ask for something we really want, we think, oh, the Anglo-Indian side is no big problem for the government to record this person. Actually, they have much more power. We saw a big fight once, like the what will trouble when the government ignored their strong side and it became a huge mess. Oh, the Anglo-Indian side is no big problem for the government, hence they listen, but they have much power. Even to run a train on the straight, fair path of goodness and justice, you first have to make the ground flat and strong. You need time, patience, and the right tools to lay the tracks properly. If we wait quietly while that hard work is done, later the train can zoom fast and smooth and happy. In England, the king and the people are more like equals. No big fighting between them. The government machines have been running smoothly for a very, very long time. Even there, to make even one good change takes so much cleverness, so much waiting, so much talking to different groups. But they don't have huge fights over opposite wants. Once everyone sees with clear reason that something is good for most people, they all say yes together. But here in our country, there are two strong sides pulling opposite ways, and we ourselves are still small and weak. So we cannot shake the government just by shouting loud words. We need smart, patient, long-thinking ways like playing a careful game. In kingly matters, that is government things, everywhere in the world, people use diplomacy, gentle, wise talking, and for us in India, we need it the most. The world does not become easy just because we wish hard and our wish is fair. The world does not become easy just because we wish hard and our wish is fair. God gives us a sweet picture. Suppose you are going to your father-in-law's house, a happy place full of yummy rice pudding, cream, and fish heads waiting just for you. That is paish. And cream, what is the cream? And master waiting for you. You are not stealing, you are invited. But there is a big pond right in the middle of the road. If you say I will walk straight through it, I won't go around. You might fall in and never reach the yummy food at all. So it's smarter to walk around the pond, take a little longer path, jump small hurdles, find clever ways to walk, clever ways past the hard spots where you can step over easily, step over. Where you can't not sit down and cry or get angry, where you find another gentle way. Diplomacy does not mean cheating or telling lies. Its true secret is don't let your own sudden angry or proud feelings push you. Wait, watch the right moment, then advise me softly at the perfect time. So my little one, Tagore is teaching us, don't just shout and fight. Don't just wish things were easy. Be patient like waiting for the pond to have a bridge. Be clever like walking around the pond instead of falling in. Come closer, come close with heart, not just loud words. Because real change needs time, wisdom, and a bent head full of love, not a stiff crowd back. Okay? I understood it all, just the part about the Anglo-Indian. Which side is stronger? The side of the Anglo-Indian. I did not get that context. And UDWART will and everything. Just in short, tell me extremely short. So even the government and the Indians used to ignore how strong the Anglo-Indian side is until the What bill, right? That is, whatever the Indians ask for, the government says no to it, because after the What bill, they also know what can happen if they say yes, because the Anglo-Indian side will be an obstacle to it, and also because the government, the Englishman, does not have the heart to say yes to anything. So now we'll quickly go through the main part, okay? I mean the original. Many among the educated class of our country are desperately trying to prove that the benefits done by the Englishman are not truly benefits at all. Having accepted these heartless benefits, they simply cannot feel any inner satisfaction in their minds. Somehow or the other, they seem eager to free themselves from the burden of gratitude. That is why these days in our newspapers, letters, conversations, and discussions, all sorts of sophistry and fault finding about the Englishman are appearing. That is, these educated class, they don't want to accept what the Englishman has done for us. They accept it, but they are not grateful for it. Hence, they are finding faults about them. Okay. In a word, the Englishman has made himself necessary to us, but he has not felt it necessary to make himself loved or make himself. He has made himself necessary to us, needed to us, but he has not made himself necessary enough to make us love him. He gives medicines, but he puts no sweetness into it. And when in the end nausea arises, he glares with red eyes and lets out the road. When he complains that this medicine is too strong, he would say, how can he gave you the medicine, that is the big thing. Most of today's agitation spring from deep-seated mental irritation. Now, every single word becomes a matter of winning or losing between the two sides. That's the very well. Okay. Most of today's agitation spring from deep-seated mental irritation. Now, every single word becomes a matter of winning or losing between the two sides. Perhaps where 5 gentle words, loving words would bring benefit, we go on scattering sparks of fire with harsh language. And where there would be no great harm in complying with a single request, the Englishman stubbornly turns away. Just I've explained this a lot now. No more explanation for people. Hear it properly. Hence I'm doing the daily version and then the funny version. This is the funny version. Here again, we have to deal with two extremely dissimilar communities, the Anglo-Indians and the Indians. Their interests conflict in many places. The driver of the monarchy cannot ignore either of these two opposing forces. Anyone who tries to do so, driver of the monarchy cannot ignore either of these two opposing forces. Anyone who tries to do so ends up powerless. When we put forward a proposal according to our own liking, we think that for the government the obstacle posed by the Anglo-Indians is hardly enough. I've just studied it. Just a second. I'll do it later. Okay. When we put forward a proposal according to our own liking, that is Indian liking, we think that for the government, the obstacle posed by the Anglo-Indians is hardly any obstacle at all. Yet, in reality, their power is greater. We have seen what kind of crisis comes from neglecting a powerful force in the upheaval over the Woodward Bill. The time of the Woodward Bill, the Indians proposed a thing, the Englishmen accepted. They thought it was fair, but then the Anglo-Indians protested and it was brought down. They have a greater power. Even to run a train on the path of righteousness and justice, one must first level the ground properly by suitable means and lay the tracks. If we patiently wait through that time and allow that work to be completed, then afterwards there is great advantage in being able to run at high speed. And progress for advancement for ground that so we should wait. In England, there is no inequality between king and subjects, and there the machinery of the state has been running for a very long time and has become easy. Even so, to bring about a single beneficial change there requires negotiation, so much perseverance and so much maneuvering of so many groups in so many ways. Yet there is no such fierce clash of opposite interests. Once, the usefulness of a particular proposal has been proved by reason to everyone, the common or majority interest unites and accepts it. Once the usefulness of a proposal has been proved, explained, everybody agrees to it. Okay, but actually important. But in India, when the matter involves two forces and we ourselves are weak in every respect, it is not possible to unsettle the government merely by the force of language. There the king and the subjects are equal, but here it's not. We are weaker and hence it's not possible for us to unsettle the government by the force of language. Various far-reaching methods must be adopted, like diplomacy, right? Now, in royal affairs, diplomacy exists. That is one of the ways. Various far-reaching methods must be adopted, not just the force of language. What is this far-reaching method? That is diplomacy. In royal affairs, diplomacy exists everywhere. And for us in India, it is needed most of all. The world does not become easy just because I wish for something and my wish is not unjust. The world does not become easy just because I wish for something and my wish is not unjust. When we are not going to commit theft but going to our father-in-law's house, when we are not going to commit theft but going to our father-in-law's house, if a pond lies in the middle of the road and we stubbornly resolve to walk straight across it, we may very well fail to reach our father-in-law's house at all. In such a case, it is better to go round the pond to reach our political father-in-law's house, where the rice pudding, mache matha payesh ইত্যাদি wait করছে, we must cross various obstacles by various means. ঠিক আছে, সোজা হেঁটে চলে যাবো, যেটা চাইছি সেটা চাই হবে না। Just because আমার চাওয়াটা is not unjust and আমার কোনো ইচ্ছা শক্তি আছে আমার ভিতরে, that does not make it That does not make it just, right? We need diplomacy. তুমি যদি মাছের মাথাটা খেতে চাও, পায়েসটা খেতে চাও, আইসক্রিমটা খেতে চাও শ্বশুরবাড়িতে গিয়ে, তাহলে তোমাকে পুকুরটা পাশ দিয়ে হাঁটতে হবে, সোজা সুজি পুকুরে পড়ে যাবে, কোনোদিন খেতে পারবে না। Where it is possible to overstep, cross করে, we must overstep. Where that convenience does not exist, instead of sitting down in anger, we should think of a way to make it possible. Okay? Where it is possible to overstep, we must overstep. Okay? And where that convenience does not exist, instead of sitting down in anger, we should think of a way. Diplomacy does not mean that one has to understand it as a deceitful conduct. Diplomacy মানে মিথ্যা কথা বলা না, it is a wise, gentle way of talking. Wise. Its true essence is this: not to be suddenly swayed by one's own personal emotions and to act understanding the opportunity of the moment. বুঝে কথা বলবো। মানে personal emotion sway হয়ে গেলে হবে না। ঠিক আছে? Diplomacy does not mean that one has to understand it as deceitful conduct. Its true essence is this: not to be suddenly swayed by one's personal emotions and to understand the opportunity of the moment. Opportunity বুঝে কথা বলতে হবে। Okay, now we have come to the final part of the video today. We'll have 3 more parts of it, so get ready. First, we'll go to the daily version. Do the same thing that they teach it to me like I am a 5-year-old child in simple language, make it fun, make it interesting, preserving the essence of the God. Don't omit anything. Okay. Imagine you and your friends are playing a very important game together. The game is called Let's Make Our Home Happier and Better. But oh no, instead of playing nicely to win the game, everyone starts doing something silly. We talk and talk and talk, we never stop talking. Even if the game does not get finished, we can't stay quiet for even 1 second. We keep saying more words. I gotta say it softly. This shows 2 things about us. First, we are still little and don't know the best way to play it. And second, this is the sad part, deep down we love 3 things more than actually winning the game. Saying mean, testing words to the other team like na, you're a loser. Second, hearing everyone clap and say, wow, you're so smart. We love to hear ourselves getting praised. And third, letting out all the grumpy, angry feelings we have been holding inside under the pretense of playing the game. So the first thing that gets little and we don't know exactly how to play the game, and deep down we like 3 things much more than winning the game. Number 1 is saying mean, teasing words to the other team. Teasing words to the other team. Second, we like to hear people praising us, hearing everyone clap and say, wow, you're so smart. And third, letting all the grumpy, angry feelings we have been holding inside. When we get one tiny chance to do these 3 things, oh boy, we get so happy. We jump up and down and forget, wait, all this shouting is hurting the real game. It's breaking our beautiful playground. And because we shout so loud and so sharp, even when we later ask nicely for something fair, the other side, the grown-up rulers, get nervous. They think if I say yes now, these kids will become extra bossy and proud tomorrow. So they hesitate and say no, even to good things. Because we don't know how to play the game. We don't respect the game. We just do 3 things. That is, talking badly about and finding faults, writing the newspaper, grumpy feeling, bring out their faults. Second, after writing these, the praises we get from our fellow Indians, we're so great, we like to get that. And third is, we let out our own grumpy feelings in the form of these words. Right? Pepper Whisper is the biggest reason why this keeps happening. A bad, prickly feeling has been born inside everyone's heart. bad prickly feeling has been born inside everyone's heart, on both sides. Day by day, it grows sharper, like a thorn getting bigger. Because of this thorn feeling, doing what is right and kind becomes harder and harder for everyone, little by little, because this thorn is growing. All this constant fighting and arguing between the big rulers and us kids, it does not even look nice to watch, it feels yucky. Even if the rulers smile on the outside, deep inside their hearts, they probably feel sad and worried too. But what can we do? The British character has thousands of good things, but it's still just human. Humans make mistakes. Humans have stiff hearts sometimes. Timur says with a gentle sigh, when you really think about this, fixing this problem is not easy at all. The very first big wall is color. Now we are talking. Just like you can't wash or scrub away the color of your skin, no matter how hard you try, the bad feeling some people have about different skin colors is stuck very, very, very deep in their minds. It's super hard to get it out. White people, the God calls them white-skinned Aryans, have looked at dark skin with yuck eyes for thousands and thousands of years. Timur says kindly, I don't want to bring big books and boring tools to show you. Everyone already knows it in their heart. Racism. He paints two beautiful pictures. White people are like the bright, busy day, always awake, running around, exploring things, full of energy. Dark people are like the soft, quiet night, calm, still, dreamy, wrapped in gentle mist. And in that nighttime heart, there might be something very, very special. Deep peace, the Indians, deep peace, sweet kindness, big white love, and feeling super close like family. But the busy, fast white man has no time to stop and look at this beauty. To him, it does not seem important. Tagore says sweetly, it's no use telling them. Even a black cow gives you white milk, or hearts can be won even if colors are different. Tagore says sweetly, and hearts can be won even if the colors are different. Those pretty Indian sayings don't help. The simple truth is, the moment a white person sees dark skin, their mind automatically feels a little, no, not like me. Just like day and night feels so different. And after color, clothes, jewelry, the way we move, the way we eat, our daily habits, everything is so different. These differences keep pushing hearts apart, like two magnets that don't want to stick. One way to fix this, no feeling, absolute no feeling, and nothing is same, is coming really close, spending time together, becoming friends. You're friends with not the same kind of people, with diverse people. But here's the sad part, Tagore notices, the very same no feeling stops people from coming close in the first place. He gives a solution that you have to stop this no, no, they are not like no, I don't want to be friends like that, or with them. You have to come close, you have to spend time. But this very no feeling stops that. Long ago, when there were no fast steamships and slow sailing boats took months and months to go around Africa from India to England, the Englishman somehow ended up feeling a bit closer to Indian people because they had to stay longer, talk more, and share more. But now, the moment a Sahib gets 3 months of holiday, zoom, he runs straight back to England. He washes off every tiny bit of India dust. He comes back fresh and clean. And here in India, their family and friend circles are getting bigger and bigger. And now, it's easy for them to live in our country because they live with people like them, right? By feeling like they're not really here at all. They're just in a different place, but with the same people. They're brought their home to India. They rule over us, but without loving us or feeling close to us. Tagore says with wonder and a little sadness, crossing thousands of miles of ocean, ruling a completely strange country all day, like it's just boring office work. Then sailing home in the evening, eating hot rice with family. Where else in the whole big history book has anyone ever done something like that? This has touched my heart for them because they're going to office, right? They're in India, they have to rule, and then go back to their home. They don't have to spend time with the people they're ruling. And hence they can never understand us. They can never feel us. That's the story. Our hearts feel hurt because the gifts feel cold. We shout too much because we want to feel big and hurt. The uncle stays far away because his heart is safe. Color and habits keep pushing everyone apart, and even when closeness could help, the same pushing away feeling stops. Even when closeness could help, the same pushing away feeling stops it from happening. Yes, it does. But now the main part, okay? And get done with this video. But we do not go that way. Whether we get the work done or not, we cannot leave out a single word. This not only reveals our inexperience and lack of judgment, it also reveals that our desire is equally in to give taunts, to receive applause, and to vent the bitterness of our minds is greater than our desire to achieve the work, the game, to win the game. This not only reveals our inexperience and lack of judgment, it also reveals that our desire to give taunts, to receive applause, and to vent the bitterness of our minds is greater than our desire to achieve the work. When we get one such opportunity, we become so pleased that we forget how much damage it does to the real task. And after sharp reprimands, even a reasonable request when made creates hesitation. In the government's minds, lest the subject's arrogance should be. The main reason for this is that such an ill feeling has taken work in the mind that grows sharper every day, making the performance of duty increasingly difficult. Bit by bit. This constant quarreling between ruler and subjects does no good even to watch. No matter how it appears outwardly, it is hard to believe that the government is inwardly indifferent to this matter. No matter how it appears, it is hard to believe that the government is inwardly indifferent to this matter. But what is to be done? After all, British character, for all its thousand qualities, is still a human character. When one thinks about it, the solution to this problem is not easy. The very first difficulty is color. Just as the color of the body cannot be washed or scrubbed away by any means, so the prejudice related to color is extremely hard to drive out of the mind. The white-skinned Aryans have looked upon black color with eyes of disgust for many thousands of years. I have no desire in this interval to collect grotesque evidence with chapters, sutras, and page numbers from English translation of the Vedas and from encyclopedia that tyrannize the readers with everybody knows about it. Everyone will understand the point. Between white and black, there is a division like that between day and night. The white race is like the day, always awake, active, eager to explore. The black race is like the night, motionless, inactive, inert, absorbed in the mist of dreams. In this dark nature, there is perhaps like the night a depth, a sweetness, a far-reaching compassion, and a sense of close intimacy. Unfortunately, the busy, restless white man has no time to discover it, and to him it has no sufficient value. It is useless to tell them even a black cow gives white milk, and that with different colors there is a unity of heart. But there is no use in all these oriental similes and comparisons. The point is this: the moment the white race sees black color, their mind cannot help being somewhat of words that they're not making. The whites, that is the day, is always awake, active, good to explore. Black race is like the night, motionless, inactive, absorbed in the mist of dreams. Motionless, inactive, absorbed in the mist of dreams. In this dark nature, there is perhaps like the night a depth, a sweetness, a far-reaching compassion. There is perhaps like the night a depth, a sweetness. In the night, okay, in the black people, in the brown people, a depth, a sweetness, a far-reaching compassion, and a sense of close intimacy. Unfortunately, the white can't see this because they are too restless, busy. The white man has no time to discover it. It has no sufficient value to him. It is useless to tell them that even a black cow gives pocket milk. After that, in dress and ornaments, habits, and customs, in every single matter, there are such dissimilarities that they constantly repel the heart. They are so different. Not even they are inferior to us. One way, this prejudice can be somewhat overcome is through close contact. But the very same prejudice prevents that close contact from happening. This prejudice can be removed by close contact, but it is the very prejudice which is stopping this contact from happening. When there were no steamers and sailing ships took very long to go around Africa with the local people. But nowadays, as soon as a Sahib gets 3 months his leave, he immediately flees to England, washes off all the dust of India and returns. And here too, their circle of relatives and acquaintances is growing wider and wider. Because of this, it has become quite possible to live in the country they have conquered by remaining as absent from it as possible. They can go home and they can bring it. Right? Very important part. They have conquered. Well, it's possible to live in the country they have conquered while remaining and absent from it as possible, and to rule over the race they govern without having to love that race. They can just simply rule. They don't need to love it. To cross the ocean from thousands of miles away, to govern an entirely foreign kingdom during the daytime as if it was mere office work, and then in the evening to sail back across the sea, go home and eat hot rice. Where else in history is there such an example? You cross the ocean, you come, you rule, you go back, you remain as absent as possible. You just treat it as work. I mean, how is that possible? How are you? How are you going to do? How? What's the point? You're treating it like goddamn corporate.